Questions to the Prime Minister. John Wilkinson. Number one, sir.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this morning I met Shimon Peres, the Israeli Foreign Minister. I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I will have further such meetings later today.
Hague.
Mr. Speaker, is it still the Prime Minister's view that the government annual report is a major innovation to be repeated every year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps before I answer his question, I should say to him, before I answer his question, perhaps I should say to him that I know this is his last Prime Minister's questions. We wish him well on all sides of the House and good luck in the future. We shall all miss his wit and humour. Perhaps not me, since I was the object of most of it, but everyone else, and as I say, we do wish him well in the future. In respect of the annual report, it is important, of course, that we set out what are the achievements and the lack of achievements of the government in whichever year we're in power.
William Hague.
May I thank the Prime Minister for his remarks about me. Debating with him at this dispatch box has been exciting and fascinating and fun and an enormous challenge, and from my point of view, wholly unproductive. In every sense. And in fact, I have to I'm told that in my time at this dispatch box, I have now asked him 1,118 direct questions. No one has counted the answers, Mr. Speaker, but it may not take very long. But on the question of the annual report, he said, the annual report, he said 4 years ago, is a major innovation. People are entitled to know how we're shaping up. This report is part of that process. We will repeat it each year. Now, the first annual report was called So What Do You Think? The second was called So What Are We Doing? This year seemed to be called So Where Is It? How does he feel about not even keeping his promise to publish a report about keeping his promises?
Well, I confess I never thought he was that keen on our annual reports when we did publish them. But obviously, Mr. Speaker, what we do, of course, is publish all the results of the things that we've done in the year, the things that we haven't done as well. And those are the things that he asked me about at the dispatch box and the over 1,000 questions he's asked me.
Well, where is it? Is really the question. But since he has abandoned the annual report as a way of holding the government to account, what about the traditional way of holding the government to account? What about ministers? Well, honourable members opposite must understand that governments must be held to account between elections as well as at elections. What about ministers taking responsibility? The government's introduction of AS levels have made school children's lives a misery, added to the burden on teachers, led to the extraordinary situation where they can't even guarantee to publish the results on time. Which minister will take responsibility for this?
Mr. Speaker, of course we take responsibility, all of us collectively as a government, for the publication of both of results and for the AS levels. But the reason that they were introduced was in order to make sure that children were tested properly throughout their schooling, and that is in common with the system in many other countries. Now, it is of course the case that after they've been introduced, it's important that we look at the way that that has been done, and there may well be lessons that we can learn from that. But I think it would be a big mistake if we ended up saying it wasn't important to test children throughout their schooling and publish the results.
In other words, Mr. Speaker, no minister will take responsibility. I have to tell him that AS level students are told that if they do not offer an adequate attempt to answer the question or complete the task, they are ungraded. And it's a good job he's not doing it. So no annual report, no minister willing to take responsibility. Let's try another form of accountability. The Prime Minister has said he accepts the need for a proper inquiry into the foot and mouth disaster. Does he agree that a proper inquiry must be a public inquiry?
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree that it has to be a public tribunal inquiry. No, I don't agree with that, for the reasons given by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, which said that it was sensible, in order to produce an inquiry quicker, that we would have a different type of inquiry. We will have that inquiry, and we will publish the results of that inquiry. But we have said also, in line again with what the Royal College has said, that it's better to have the inquiry after we have eradicated the disease, which must remain our number one priority. And incidentally, in respect of the AS levels, I didn't say no one would take responsibility. I said we all as a government take responsibility.
Well, for the whole government to resign immediately would be a rather extreme step to take over the AS levels. However, maybe welcome one. So there is no annual report, no minister will take responsibility for a fiasco, and no public inquiry will be held, despite all past precedent, into foot and mouth. Perhaps at least he will agree to accountability to this House. After this week's vote in this House, will he now listen to all sides of the House and adopt the proposals that select committee members should not be appointed by the whips or party managers at all?
Mr. Speaker, I gather the Modernisation Committee this morning decided they will look into this, they will publish a report, and we will consider it very carefully. I simply point out that in the 18 years of the Conservative government, when he was in office, it's funny that all these great designs to reform Parliament never saw the light of day.
Well, for my 1,123rd and final question, and on the same theme, can I ask him, on the theme of accountability, about what he and I know to be the case, that one Prime Minister's questions a week is not an adequate way of holding the Prime Minister of our country to account, that members of this House on all sides should have the opportunity to question the Prime Minister of the day more frequently and on a more sustained basis. And wouldn't that be in the best interests of government, parliament and public engagement in our political life?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, in respect of holding the government to account, I would just point out to him that, in actual fact, over the 4 years that I've been Prime Minister, I've answered questions for longer in this House than either of my two predecessors and made more statements than either of my two predecessors. And in respect of accountability, of course we as a government are held to account. We are held to account in this House, where again the number of ministerial statements I think has been far in excess of the previous government's record, for example, and we are held to account by the British people. We were held to account by them on June the 7th, and we were returned with this majority as a result of that general election. So we will indeed, Mrs. Whitten-Hume, indeed, I hope he's not retiring to the back benches, since I think they're getting rather overcrowded at the moment, but I hope he's not, because I would have thought there is every role for him, for example, as a shadow Foreign Secretary, because if the Right Honourable Gentleman Rushcliffe were to win, he could come here and tell us about the virtues of the single currency and the rapid reaction force, and alternatively, the Right Honourable Member for Chingford were elected, he could come here and tell us about what a dreadful idea it was and how the country would have none of it. But in any event, and whatever he does, we wish him well.
Donald Kennedy.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, may I first of all associate the Liberal Democrats with the very proper. I think actually, Mr. Speaker, public empathy out there probably too. And that is to associate ourselves with the good wishes that have been very properly expressed by the Prime Minister to the outgoing leader of the Conservative Party. And we wish him well, and we commiserate with his successor, whoever it's going to be. Returning to the earlier question about the sacking of Bob Kiley and his role in terms of chair of London Regional Transport, would the Prime Minister explain to the House why it was that only 10 weeks ago he was in agreement with Bob Kiley being appointed to that job, and only 10 weeks later he now is in favour of sacking him?
Mr. Speaker, I will explain exactly why. Because Mr. Kiley was appointed chairman of London Transport in order to negotiate what he wanted within the outlines of the public-private partnership, and he came back a couple of weeks ago and said he was unable to do so. And the dispute with Mr. Kiley, and indeed with Ken Livingstone, is not actually about the running of the tube as such, it's about the financing of it. And we are putting in, from the general British taxpayer, billions of pounds of investment into the underground, the largest ever investment that has been made, and we need to make sure there is value for money, and that taxpayers' money is properly used. Now, I understand entirely why Mr. Kiley and Mr. Livingstone want to take the money and spend it as they wish, but we have a duty on behalf of the taxpayer to get value for money, and that's what we'll do.